What is your worst experience with bad neighbors? When my wife and I moved into our house in the summer of 2019, the neighbors on either side of us warned us about the people renting the house directly behind ours. Apparently they had been known to cause trouble and blow things way out of proportion, bordering on paranoia of everyone around them. We kept it in mind but had no issues for the first 6 months or so after moving in. Their house sits on a hill behind ours and so overlooks the majority of our backyard due to the elevation change. Well, one morning, technically, at about 3 a.m. we wake up to ring notifications from our phones showing video from our front doorbell. There's a man standing barefoot in a sleeveless shirt on our porch pounding on our front door. We give it 2-3 minutes just watching him on the app thinking maybe he's drunk and has the wrong house, essentially giving him the benefit of the doubt. But then we start to hear him say, "Come out you fucking pussy. I'm gonna fuck you up," etc. And he leaves the porch and starts to head around the side of the house towards our backyard. Considering we had no idea who this was, my wife now immediately calls the police as I move out of our bedroom towards the external doors to look, listen for any attempt of home invasion. At this point our neighbors directly behind us throw a huge spotlight into our backyard from theirs. We're thinking, okay cool, they know something is up and they're trying to help us out by shedding light on our backyard. The cops arrive several long minutes later and knock. We explain the situation and they head out back to look around and get the scoop from the neighbors with the spotlight. It turns out that the spotlight neighbor was the one on our porch. He had jumped our fence into our backyard and up into his yard and then threw the light on. He told the police that several nights prior, I had let my puppy out into my own backyard in the middle of the night, and because I was in my boxers, that I was trying to expose myself to his family because they could look down on our entire yard from where there sits. He then followed us up to the police with evidence which consisted of videos he had taken through our windows of my wife and I inside of our own home doing totally normal things like chores, watching TV, etc. Nothing inappropriate or scandalous. Not that it would have mattered anyway. We were in our own home. Because of the elevation difference, if they went out of their way they could technically slightly see through our closed blinds due to the angle. So they had been filming us for no reason at all and expected the police to see this as reasonable. The cops came back in and my wife was devastated. A huge breach of our privacy of course, and totally unfounded accusations as we had never done anything to anger these people. We hadn't even met them. The police told us just don't worry about it. If he tries something again just give us a call, which wasn't the most comforting at the time. They moved out a few months later without any additional issues. My wife and I celebrated like it was a holiday when we saw the moving van in their driveway. Lived in a small apartment and my neighbors always cranked up their music to 11, like loud, and until something like 7 a.m., maybe later, but that's when I would leave for work. It was so loud that I couldn't hear my own TV over it. My neighbors and I would bang on the door but they would never open the door. It was like trying to sleep at a festival. Then at some point I found out they often left for a bar across the street but would just leave the music on. So I would pull the breaker for their apartment, but they would just come back at 5 a.m. and turn it back on. It was reported by heaps of people, but nothing was ever done. So at some point I would jam their lock when they went out so their keys wouldn't work anymore and they had to get the property manager, and while the music was blasting inside, after a couple of times of that happening they were evicted. Maybe I'm the bad neighbor in this story. My neighbor's son used to go out partying all week, bring his friends back and then party at his place till 5/6 a.m. The issue, he would party upstairs in his bedroom, music blaring, yelling. If it was just constant noise I could sleep through it, but not that. I was running on no sleep and had to be up at 8 to go to work. I was getting in trouble at work for being exhausted and no one believed it was because my neighbor wasn't letting me sleep. It was hell. So after trying to talk to the dick, We posted a note through the door. His mom worked nights. She got home and all hell broke loose. The note was reasonable. We asked them to move the after-party downstairs because we couldn't sleep through all the noise. We didn't intend for his mom to get the note. Wow, she was so mad. When my alarm went off an hour or so later, he was angrily yelling that it wasn't fair that my alarm woke him up every day. Yes, an alarm going off once or twice before work was totally unreasonable, and his music blasting all night was. The parties stopped though. Had an upstairs neighbor once that obviously worked nights. Sometimes we'd hear him getting home after midnight and doing stuff, but it generally wasn't bad, until one night, he got home and absolutely blasted Green Day's Brain Stew. Painfully loud. Loud enough I had trouble talking to a person standing right next to me. All the adjacent apartments were woken up. Someone beat on his door and threatened the cops to end it. And then he was back to being not much of a problem. I don't know if he just had one bad day at work or what. A neighbor had a faulty car alarm that would go off randomly until it was turned off. I guess the neighbor got sick of it, because they stopped turning the alarm off. It would just go off until it shut itself off. I'll admit to disconnecting the car battery a couple of times, but I wasn't the one who used stickers that never come off, nor was I the one who flattened all 4 tires. I was pretty happy when I saw the sticker mess with flat tires leaving the complex on a wrecker never to return. Guess they pissed someone off more than me. When I started my first job post-college, I was thrilled to live by myself for the first time in my life. I had this beautiful 1-bedroom apartment in a solid part of town. Everything was great until 6 months later, when new tenants moved in next to my unit. I had a package go missing. A phone case. Amazon had posted a photo of it at my door, so I thought that it was just a fluke. Then it happened again, and again, and again. The office wouldn't accept packages, so I had to get my items delivered to friends' places instead. Overall wildly inconvenient, and the police didn't care in the slightest when I reported it, so I just figured I'd deal with it. Fast forward a few weeks, and I come home after being gone for less than an hour, to see that my doorknob and front door were scrapped up and the knob was barely hanging on. Long story short, I had been parking in plain view of this guy's window, so he was able to tell when I was home. I am 100% convinced he tried to break into my place, and that me coming home early interrupted him. I googled his name after I moved. I got an offer package at his door, and found that he was a convicted felon with charges that include grand theft auto, domestic assault, drug dealing, and an attempted break-in. I've been getting my packages shipped to my work recently, but my latest plan for our building package thief was this: order something from Amazon, carefully open the box on the bottom side so the main tape stays intact, fill the box with glitter and poke some small holes in it. When the thief carries the package to their apartment, it will leave a trail of glitter on the carpet that will lead to their apartment smile. I got along fine with my neighbors for 3 years. A mother and her adult son. They were both nice, but the son was very quiet. Sometimes he'd say hey and other times he didn't seem to recognize me. I assumed he was a recovering addict and didn't want to intrude. What ended up catching me though was when I listed the house for sale and found a family who was excited to make an offer. They were coming for their 3rd tour so they could show it to their extended family. Apparently during this tour, the son scaled onto my patio, which is a feat in itself, and pounded on the back door and windows screaming at them to get out. He managed to break one of the windows before they cleared the property and called the police. When they contacted me, I learned he was schizophrenic and had a considerable history of violent outbursts, including attempting to stab family members. Apparently he thought I had stolen the house from its rightful owner and was trying to sell it behind their back. To his credit though, he referred to me as a bodybuilder, which I didn't hate. The family decided not to make an offer and I ended up having to pull it from the market. I had this happen in an apartment I lived in with my fiancé once. Our downstairs neighbor was a strange dude, kept leaving his door open, and it wasn't a nice area, and we could hear him yelling frequently. One day we hear a huge slam. I went out to check and see if he was okay. He was instantly aggressive, so I shrugged and went back inside. Then he comes upstairs to knock on our door and accuses me of stealing from him. I tell him to get bent and shut the door. The next day was the weekend, and so we were out doing stuff. When we came home, he had tried to break into our apartment with a fire extinguisher and smashed up the wall also for good measure. We called the police, explained the situation, and they went to talk to him. They came back and said that he claimed I was bullying him, and that we should just stay away from each other. Another day I was at work and he was shrieking at my fiancée through the door to let him in so he could save her. I rush home, and there's more marks on the door from him, and fiancé is freaked out. Call the cops again, and they continue to brush us off since he's saying I'm bullying him too. Finally we have our lease come up and move across town, but as we're moving he tries one more time to intimidate me, I guess. He just stood outside on a T-post like a weirdo while I loaded the moving truck. Then we didn't hear from him for a while, before he eventually reported to the police that my fiancée was actually his wife and I had kidnapped her. We had to go in and get a restraining order filed in the whole shebang. Turns out he had just arbitrarily stopped taking his meds one day, and he had no friends or family local to the area to notice he was clearly unwell. We rented a house that had another apartment in the basement. The lady who lived below us kept to herself for the most part, so we didn't see her much. Part of our rental was a detached garage, and she asked if she could put small deep freezer in our garage. We were using it for storage, so we were fine with it. After a couple weeks of having her freezer in there, it somehow got unplugged and she came unglued on us and wanted us to pay to replace everything. I understood her frustration, but we hardly ever went into the garage since it was only for storage. In other words, we definitely didn't unplug it, and our landlord agreed. But she was pissed. She had a son in college who came home for the summer. During that summer he found a cat and brought it home. His mom said no cats inside, so he would feed the kitten outside. She was pretty wild. He left for school again in the fall and we noticed that the cat was getting very thin. We started feeding her outside in her usual spot. Around Christmas we bought a bag of cat food and I made a plate of cookies and left them both at our neighbor's front door. The next day they were both back on our porch. Rude. Whatever. We continued to feed the cat because she obviously wasn't feeding her. A few weeks later the cat came to our door crying. She was trying to come inside. Super weird considering she was pretty wild and we had never let her inside before. I let her in and noticed she was pregnant and for sure about to have babies. I made her a little corner and she had babies the next day. We let her stay in the house with us, but we knew we couldn't keep her. I went downstairs to talk to our neighbor. She said that her son's cat was a boy, so the cat we had obviously wasn't his. I posted on Facebook to see if anyone was interested in fostering a cat and her kittens because we couldn't keep her. Her son saw my post on Facebook and got super mad at his mom. She then called the cops and said that I stole her cat and lied to her when she confronted me about having the cat in my possession. It was the stupidest, most frustrating thing that had ever happened to me as far as neighbors go. Edit/update, didn't mean to leave you wanting more. Honestly didn't think people would care so much about the story. The police called animal control, who then contacted us. They asked us to take the cat and her kittens to the shelter so that if our neighbor really wanted the cats she would have to pay the fee as well as get her vaccinated and licensed. We did take them to the shelter and as far as I know, she did pay the fees to pick her up. However, I did see her on the animal shelter's Facebook adoption page not long after that. Poor baby. For the record, I was heartbroken to have to take her to the shelter. I felt awful for moving her and her babies around like that. I am sure that she was so anxious and scared. We would have tried to keep her, but we were moving to a new place that same week, hence the urgency to find her a foster home, and we weren't allowed to have pets. All authorities involved thought that she was nuts, and I think they were also frustrated to have to deal with this stupid situation. I used to live in a horrible apartment with paper-thin walls. The people next door were a woman who looked like she was in her 70s and what I thought was her 30-something grandson. They would yell at each other all day, constantly blast their TV, and the smell of their cigarette smoke would waft through into my apartment and make the place absolutely reek. The worst was at night when the two of them would have loud sex. which is how I figured out they weren't related. Every night for an hour, creaking bed banging against my bedroom wall and the old woman moaning like a stuck pig. Nightmarish. I also think the guy kept track of my schedule and watched for me, because whenever I came home or went out, even when I took out the garbage, he would be there outside his place, trying to chit-chat with me while staring at my body and being completely gross. Lived there a year, but it felt like 10. I had some neighbors below me years ago that this reminds me of. Mother and son, plus sometimes his ex, and sometimes their kids. I feel terrible for the kids because the adults were the trashiest people. The place reeked of pot 24/7. They would park their vehicle on the grass as they were at the back of the building, and they drove everybody nuts with how loud they were. I once recorded audio of the mom and son fighting where he was screaming he was going to kill her very graphically. Saw a guy in the building across from us also on his balcony subtly recording in case it escalated. The fight ended when his ex showed up either with or for the kids, and they started arguing instead. At one point she screamed that she had crabs and then drove off. It was absolutely wild. Oh my god, I currently have a neighbor like this. She's constantly screaming and arguing with her boyfriend, and having sex at 2 a.m. Even worse is she's always fucking hawking up OG, and you can hear her doing it no matter where you are in the house. I'm a pretty heavy sleeper, so her screaming and banging don't usually wake me up, but my mom has to sleep with the loud box fan on every night to kill some of the noise. We had some neighbors that used to leave their garbage out in plastic bags the night before garbage day, instead of putting it in their bin. Around here, that's just ringing the dinner bell for raccoons and other critters. Sure enough, come morning there's garbage strewn all over the neighborhood. What the raccoons and skunks didn't spread around, the wind picked up the slack. Some of the people on the street kindly approached the guy and asked him to put his garbage in a bin. He told them to go fuck themselves. Thus began the garbage wars. Every morning of garbage day, some people on my street would collect all the half-eaten and rotten trash from their lawns and toss it back into the dude's backyard. He would collect it, then dump it back on their lawns, or cram it into their bushes. People started finding half-eaten burritos and candy wrappers in their mailboxes. The street started to look like a slum. Police were called, health inspectors, city by law enforcement. Each side was calling in whatever authority they could muster to get their enemy in shit. The dude and his family, amazingly his wife seemed perfectly pleasant, lasted about 8 months then moved. Every once in a while I find a random margarine lid or piece of styrofoam in my hedge, and my mind goes back to those dark days of war. My mother lives in a suburban area. One of her neighbors is mental. He stalks people, mostly women, but not exclusively, regularly, and at some point pricked one particular female neighbor and stick with her. He would go around and look through her windows, would try entering all doors, even did at some point, and follows her with his car. All that while occasionally doing this to the other neighbors too. He would often stand on his balcony, drinking beer and yelling how everyone hates him, and then start crying. One time he went on the street, lay down with arms and legs on the air, started wiggling, then got up and went back in as if nothing happened. Several attempts to call the police on him ended with him saying, "How about you make a big party with all of the neighbors, drink something with him and just get along." The stalked neighbor started filming him to have evidence. She had lots of it, but the police was not interested. Another neighbor went to the police too and complained and said that there must be many cases of the other neighbor be already there. There was none. They didn't even file the complaints. This was going on for 8 years. 5 years focusing on this particularly neighbor. The main victim has serious mental health issues by now. 1 month ago she found a charity that helps with cases like this. They helped and the police got off their asses, but still said they couldn't do much except for a restraining order, which they wouldn't react to. With the help of the organization she went to court. The neighbor was lying but got caught, since everything was on camera. The judge was really shocked how this could have been going on with such overwhelming evidence and nobody doing anything. He was sentenced to prison or mental institution. Even with everything going on, I hope it's the latter and he will get serious help. This is a sick person after all. I lived in an apartment with a lot of rotating tenants. An elderly lady moved in across the hall from me, promptly started hoarding. I started to figure it out when her deck, porch started to fill up with odds and ends furniture, including but not limited to a roll-top desk. She also yelled at me once for taking her key out of the front door and putting it in the mail slot. Anyway, after a couple of weeks I started to realize I hadn't seen her in a while and started to smell something real weird. Turns out, she had died and no one knew about it for a week, hence the smell. Her family came and cleared out all her stuff about a week after that. This is Wisconsin in the winter, and I had my good Doc Marten work boots outside my door because they were wet. They used one of my boots to prop open their door while they moved out and then stole them when they were done.